All right. James, GSS Science, thank you for sitting down with me today and having
Yeah,
this conversation about what you do and your research and everything.
it's a pleasure. I'm always happy to talk about kettlebells.
Yeah. So you're in, I looked up Richmond on Google and it
Yeah,
looks like you're just outside of Melbourne.
yeah. So just outside the CBD, really. So it's in it's in Melbourne, really, you'd say. But if you've got the CBD, you've got East Melbourne, then Richmond. So um, Melbourne isn't a huge city in comparison to some of the cities in the US, but we've got 5 or 6 million people in Melbourne.
Hmm.
And I can walk into the CBD in about 30 minutes. So I'm pretty close to the heart of the city, I guess you could say.
What's CBD?
Central Business District.
Okay.
So it's just where all the skyscrapers and stuff are, which again are probably relatively small compared to some of the US cities, but basically where all the businesses and stuff are, I'm about a 30-minute walk, so quite close, really.
Okay. Cool. And it's January 12th when we're recording this, 2021. In terms of COVID, are gyms still operating
Yeah,
where
well,
you
it's the
are?
13th here, but obviously
Yeah.
that's just time difference. Yeah, so I'm a gym owner as well. So basically, it depends where you sit on the fence, but I think Australia's done quite well. Melbourne specifically, excuse me, we had quite a hard lockdown.
Mm.
So for a comparison, about where the UK was, where they started, so I think it was like 700 cases a day. So we got to about that, and then we had quite a strict lockdown for 3 months or so. So basically, I was teaching all my classes from home. I wasn't allowed to go into the gym, even though the gym was across the road. I could go out for exercise once a day for an hour, and you could go. One person from your household could go to the shops once a day. So
Mm.
that's essentially what you could do. And there's sort of compassionate grounds, so you could have carers and stuff like that. But essentially, with some of the lockdowns, it didn't really start driving down our numbers until we went to that stricter approach. But then after that, we had about 60 days free of COVID. And then just for New Year's Eve, we had a few cases, but now we've got back to no cases. So I guess it depends where you sit on the fence, I guess. But generally speaking, most people are quite happy to have the numbers quite low. Some people found it really difficult, the lockdown. It's obviously, as a gym owner, it's kind of tough. But when you
Yeah.
weigh up the health, particularly for, say, some members of my family, it's quite a motivation for me. So we've got some people with some health conditions that wouldn't do very well. So I'd
Hmm.
hate to be in the gym and get it and be okay, but give it to them. We also got like a small baby, so we're not sure what that does to them long term. Um, so it's, I guess, a bit of a contrast to the US, but it's just a terrible thing for the whole world, and we're all sort of going through it together. But different
Yeah.
places have different approaches which suit some people and other people not so much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So were they policing it? Like you said, you had 1 hour of free time outdoors, or
Yeah. So not really. So I think a lot of people, I think how they um, set a lot of things is basically they assume, in Australia at least, it might be a bit different in the US. We had so we've got mandatory masks as well outside in Melbourne, which
okay.
is different in different states. We're the only ones to have that. But so the police would potentially fine you, but they have some discretion. We train a
Hmm.
few police officers at the gym as well, but typically they wouldn't come in. They wouldn't be like, you've been out for that long. So people would probably be 90 minutes. We have a baby as well, and on compassionate grounds, we would walk him. Like my wife would walk him, and I would walk him. We'd probably go out a couple of times a day just to settle him down, really. Um, I think they were quite lenient on that, but kind of like guidelines. I think if the police saw you outside, um, and then they saw you 2 hours later and you're still in the park doing something,
Sure.
then they might say, I don't know if they'd fine you or anything. There's a couple of times when there's big crowds and they were sort of partying at the beach because they just got sick of the situation.
Yeah.
And I imagine they would have fined them. But typically for fines and things like that, it'd be more if you were just blatantly not wearing a mask, and they'd probably just ask you to put it on. And if you didn't, then, you know, and again, it was a sliding continuum on depending on how many cases we had and things like that.
Cool. So is everything open now?
Yeah, so basically there's just a few restrictions on pubs. So you're allowed like 30 people or 15 people to a household. Pubs just have to follow like, it's a little different at the moment, but I think 1 person per 4 square meters in the venue. And previously it was just table service, but I think they can stand up now. I haven't been going to the pub too much recently because of having a baby and things like that. But so in the gym, it's one thing that's a bit interesting is I don't think they really police this, but essentially when you're inside at the moment, we're wearing masks, specifically in Melbourne. In other parts of the country, they're not. I should say Melbourne's been the hardest hit by COVID. Sydney's second, and Queensland, which is at the top end of the East Coast, basically have had nothing. So recently people were going on holidays to like Queensland, and they're just saying it's wild because it's like it doesn't exist. And
Yeah.
I think a lot of people in Melbourne have a bit of a hangover about wearing masks and socially distancing. And it's sort of like if someone gets into your personal space, it's kind of confronting for some people. It's a weird conditioning, which is slowly winding back. And again, it depends on the person and how much things bother you. Some people don't really mind the masks, and other people find them really frustrating. Western Australia have basically had a hard border the whole time because they've had no cases. So they've just like, get stuffed. The rest of Australia, we just, we're gonna keep the economy going just with their mining and whatever else they do over there. And I train a few people online over there, and I found it so bizarre because they're just going to barbecues and just everything's just normal. They have very few restrictions. So recently we had like some cricket test matches. I'm not sure if you're familiar with cricket, but I guess it'd be like, so we sort of had like half capacity or quarter capacity at venues. So
Okay.
they wouldn't really do that unless they were reasonably confident with things. And now they're spending a lot of effort in contact tracing, or recently a couple of places go into lockdown for like 2 or 3 days for contact tracing, because they determine someone has the UK, I believe it's a UK strain or South African strain, which is a bit more,
Right.
it spreads a little bit easier. So they're a bit more aggressive. So they're locking down things to try and keep it in the COVID normal, I guess, if you will. Sorry, going back to the gym. So right now we're meant to wear a mask when we're in the gym, but once you're doing strenuous exercise, you don't need to wear a mask. So it's a bit of a gray area, really. Like, specifically before the guidelines were, if you're doing, it would be like, quote, bench press, wear a mask. But if you're running on a treadmill, then you don't have to. But now it's just strenuous exercise. So
That's
it's a
very
little bit odd.
specific.
Yeah. So
kettlebell swings, mask, snatches. No.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think at the end of the day, people just use their own discretion. For us at a gym, so we run a small, like 250 square meter gym, which is kind of like group personal training. We've cut down our class size from 15 as a max to like 12, and we've got 9 squat racks. So we typically would sort of allocate people to a squat rack, and if we're a bit over, then we'll put people over in a different corner, or we'll run like doing deadlifts instead of squats or something just for social distancing. So essentially we just keep a mask on for the warm up, and then once you're exercising, it's up to your own discretion. And if you have asthma or something, you don't have to wear a mask. Or that's kind of how we do it, and we just try to do the right thing, but at the same time, it's a bit grey. And from my understanding is they don't really enforce it with the gyms. They just kind of would like you to follow it. So for you to get fined, you'd have to probably do something pretty stupid, like pack the gym out and have it live streamed on the internet of like a competition with just no social distancing and no one wearing masks. But if people aren't exercising and they're wearing a mask, it shouldn't be a problem.
Interesting.
To be fair, all the stuff could change in the next couple of days because it's quite a fluid situation. And if you're not watching the news, it's hard to know.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah.
So for anybody who doesn't follow you yet, follow GSS Science. I came across your account probably in 2019, and you were doing a post on your research on some kettlebell training. I thought that was phenomenal. I don't know of anybody else doing research, scientific papers on kettlebell training.
Yeah, so I think some of my papers were the first ones looking at kettlebell sport and specifically tuning into the snatch. There's a friend of mine in Queensland. He's a physio or a physical therapist. He's doing his PhD in kettlebell training. He has more of a hard style background, so we have a good conversation because we sort of come at things from a different background. But he's a kettlebell physio. So he's looking at geriatrics or like older people and how kettlebells improve, I believe, muscle mass and bone mineral density and activities of daily living and stuff like that. And as you can imagine, if you can swing a kettlebell, it's probably pretty good for helping you stand out of a chair or balance and walking around and things like that. And I think that's one thing that's particularly in a pandemic, one thing that's great about kettlebells is they don't take up much room and you can get a lot of fitness qualities out of them, however you want to attack it. But yeah, so my research was initially predominantly in the snatch, and now I'm sort of turned my attention a bit more to the swing. But I was lucky enough to get some world champions into the lab, and we looked at their technique. So I sort of monitored the trajectory or their trajectory or the kettlebell's trajectory when they were doing the snatch.
Mm-hmm.
And what was really interesting to me is each of them had slightly different styles. So I kind of think of kettlebell sport, it's almost any style you want to do as long as you follow the principles. And the main thing is the movement variability, or they had what's called low endpoint variability. So the trajectory would follow a slightly different path, ever so slightly, on the way up and way down. And within that, there would be a little bit of it's almost like a Goldilocks zone. So there's kind of like a bit of a bandwidth, which is kind of optimal. And they would sort of move within that. And that would allow them, again, in the context of kettlebell sport, for people that don't know, typically you do a snatch for 10 minutes and you change your hands, or you do one hand change. So rotating or slightly little variations can be useful for spreading the load throughout your body. And that happens a lot in endurance running and swimming and stuff like that. There is little changes throughout the lift, but the end point, or when they're in what we call fixation or the lockout, was extremely low variability. And that would allow them to replicate similar movement or start from the same position each time. And I think that's a really key thing that a lot of people can take away from that, is that low endpoint variability is really good. With kettlebell sport in mind, you can follow like what's called a modern style or a classic style. Classic style is kind of similar to more of an Olympic lifting, like taking Olympic lifting principles and applying that to the kettlebell snatch. So it's slightly different to say a hard style snatch. I've done some hard style courses or done some training with some people who are certified in hard style and have some good conversations with those sort of people, but I'm not an RKC or a Strong First certificate person. So take what I say about hardstyle with a grain of salt. So within the kettlebell snatch, if you're doing like a GS kind of thing in mind, you have, you start from your fixation, you'd have a drop phase, then you have what we call a re-gripping phase, where the kettlebell goes sort of from diagonally across your palm into your fingers. And that's something that is really quite unique with the kettlebell, that you have to move it around your palm and stuff like that. Whereas a dumbbell or a barbell, you don't really do that. So you've got your fixation, your drop, your re-gripping, then kind of your backswing. And you kind of maneuver your body around where the kettlebell is going. So typically if the kettlebell is going forward, you're moving backwards. And when the kettlebell is going backwards, you're moving kind of forwards to counterbalance and try to be as efficient as possible. And then on the way up, you kind of had this forward swing phase. Then you have what we call our acceleration pull. So our forward swing is like repositioning yourself to apply your force a bit more vertically. So it's a bit more efficient. Then we have our acceleration pull, which is kind of like your second pull in a barbell snatch. And then we have our regripping or our hand insertion, and then back to fixation. Whereas I believe with a hard style, they're kind of more thinking like 3 phases, like kind of a hip, really explosive single hip action, whereas the kettlebells have the double knee bend kind of action typically. Again, there's some people who compete in kettlebell sport who basically use a hard style, and they're quite successful. So I think you shared a recent post of mine where I was sort of saying, I'm surprised there aren't more people who do hard style competing in kettlebell sport, especially for like a 5-minute event. I understand it's not optimized for efficiency, but I think a lot of hardstyle people particularly would do quite well with the multi-switch events. Maybe they don't want to do 10, 12 minutes all the time, but I know a lot of people can snatch really well for 10 minutes. But
what
yeah,
do you,
sorry,
what about the hardstyle people or their approach would lend them to doing well in those shorter events?
Yeah, so I mean, they do lots of snatches, and the multi-switch is one thing that I think it makes it quite accessible. So particularly in Europe, obviously in Eastern Europe, there's the military snatch competition, which is getting more popular. I think in Eastern Europe or in Russia, it's specifically for the military, and it's I believe they hardstyle. I think it's a Secret Service snatch test or something like that, which is like 200 reps with a 24 is above that in 10 minutes is a good standard. And I think that's multi-switch, and I think you can put it down. With the military snatch, which, you know, maybe that was something they did back when Pavel was over in the USSR, which now obviously different. Now maybe they do a 12-minute with multi-switch, you don't put it down, but they have lots of competitions with that. So I think the multi-switch makes it more a systemic, more just a general aerobic system. And sometimes, for me personally, like I don't train too much over a 20 RPM. So when I go over to 22 or 24, sometimes I feel like it's just how effectively I can do the exercise. My conditioning's good enough to do 24, but I'm not used to doing it. I'm trying to be a bit more efficient. So I just kind of have to shorten up things a little bit, which I'm not that used to. So sometimes, again, if you think of hardstyle, like they're just trying to sprint, get it out as quickly as possible. Again, I'm probably bastardizing that a bit. Kettlebell sport is trying to be as efficient as possible working with things. When you're going really fast, there are some lifters that can do it fantastically, but for me personally, I find 24 to do good reps pretty tricky. So I think there's probably some guys who would do quite well because it would just become a limitation for conditioning, because they're like, for my limitation might not be my conditioning so much, maybe just getting used to doing 24 reps a minute, whereas they're already quite good at that, and maybe it's just conditioning or something like that. So I think that's where there could be like a nice kind of where the two could meet, I guess. Or in Australia, we do 5-minute competitions and we do lots of one arm stuff. We try to be really inclusive, which I think is really good. But I think you can just get a lot from competing and being judged with kettlebell sport, because it sort of makes you think about what your body's doing when you're locking out and keeping your form really crisp, or like I said, paying attention to that low endpoint variability, or really locking out the kettlebell. Yeah, so I think the multi-switch is the big one. When you're doing kettlebell sport, you're trying to be efficient. You only change hands once, typically, unless you're doing half marathons or this 12-minute one. Hardstyle, typically you're multi-switching, so they're already quite good at that. If they say were to do a 10-minute competition where you do 5 minutes each hand, that's quite a large barrier to get in. Whereas if you're already doing 10 minutes multi-switch, adding another 2 minutes is maybe a bit of a hassle at first, a bit more conditioning required, but it should be pretty achievable.
Cool. So I was looking at one of your videos on YouTube, um, biomechanics of the kettlebell snatch. So it
Yeah,
looked
yeah.
like you were mapping out the trajectory as well as the force. Could you tell us what you were measuring, and at a very high level, how did you measure these metrics?
Yeah, yeah, great question. So, um, like I said before, the first study I did, I was lucky enough to get these world champions in, and so we had 4 world champions, and we placed some markers on the kettlebell, and we had 8 infrared cameras. So when 2 or more infrared cameras can see one of the markers, they can triangulate its position. So we mapped out the
Wow.
trajectory, and so basically, when they're relatively fresh. So I should say, for context, these guys were all from overseas and they're running workshops and they had a pretty busy schedule. So I was pretty keen to try and get like them to do 10-minute set with a 32 or something, like a competition set.
Right.
But I think they were a bit tired, and we had them in the lab at like 6 a.m. So there's some constraints there and limitations there, but they did like a minute. A couple of guys did some longer stuff, but we only ever published the first minute at 16 reps a minute. And basically, they all had a nice C shape. And so, and they had very low endpoint variability. So we just like looked at how much the curve each time it went up and down, how much variability there was. But what was really interesting, and again, with the GS, how you have like 2 leg movements, you have like double leg extension. On the way up in the backswing, so again, the lowest point for these guys was when the kettlebell was passing through their legs, and then it actually moves up. And for kettlebell sport, you typically would try and relax your quads, almost let your grip relax, or just use just enough in your grip just to hold on to it for when you come back down and you have that forward swing. It's almost like a moment of rest, I guess you could say. So that's probably something that's a little bit different. Is in kettlebell sport, you try and rest as much as possible and then just apply enough force. And so this lifting up in the backswing, or a lot of people talk about like a pendulum. So if you think of the kettlebell moving like a
Yeah.
pendulum, swinging back up to help you come back down. So they had a really nice kind of pendulum component there. So that was quite interesting. And then when we looked at the force, we looked at it a little bit for those guys. We didn't publish that, but we looked at 12 rank 1, which is like 24 kilo, a couple of CMS, which is candidate for Master of Sport, typically using 28s. Looked at that level lifter, and we looked at the force involved in the snatch, and we looked at those points. So what we kind of found was basically the most ground reaction force, or the force that you apply into the ground, was at that lowest point. So you'd apply on the way up, you'd apply your force into the ground. And then as the kettlebell moved forward a little bit, that's when you'd apply the most force to the kettlebell. So there's this little lag from, pushing both legs into the ground and then the force applied to the kettlebell, which was quite cool. So you could see on the backswing up, there's, relatively low force and the kettlebell's kind of weightless in a way. And then it's coming forward, and then you really starting to apply your force when it just passes your knees, and then you're applying that into the ground really hard, and then it's transferring into the kettlebell like a split second later. But then once it's about parallel with the ground, you're really just guiding it. So you've done all your work in that kind of just as it passes the knees, and then as it swings up. And sorry, go on.
So the greatest amount of force you found was after the backswing and then on the way back up?
Yeah, yep. So, and on the way down, it was also basically as it passed through the legs, there was kind of like a peak. So, but basically in the forward swing, quite low force to begin with because you're kind of relaxed. And again, you've got that pendulum, so it's kind of moved up. And then as it goes forward, it would peak. The force you apply into the ground would be, hopefully this makes sense with my hands, but basically at the lowest point as it passes through your legs, and then you're sort of accelerating the kettlebell, and then a moment later as the kettlebell is kind of just moving past your knees, that's the kettlebell's peak force. So the force applied into your ground and then the force applied to the kettlebell were at slightly different times. But what was really cool is, again, on the way up at about parallel to the ground, it was kind of weightless and you're really guiding the kettlebell up. on the way back down, it was reversed. So you apply a bit more force. The force to the kettlebell peaked a bit before it went through your legs. And then as it went past your legs, then the force into the ground. So it's kind of like on the way up, it's legs, then kettlebell. On the way down, it's kettlebell, then legs. And then it moves into that backswing. So that was really cool. And I think what's potentially, so for, I mean, people can look at the paper, but you kind of see almost like a McDonald's sign for the force. So if a higher line would indicate more force. So you have a high, so on the way down, you have a high force like a McDonald's M, and then it goes low, which is at the backswing. And then you have another high peak on the way up. Where a hard style snatch or swing might be different is it might just be an inverted U. And it is different depending on your style. But again, this is kind of, I think, really nicely, at least sums up where the two try to be different, which is kettlebell sport, you have, as it swings up in the pendulum, you try to relax. So you have this drop off of force, and then you apply your force again. So it's kind of like two distinct efforts, whereas with the hard style, with the inverted U, or I should say with kettlebell sport, if you do a squat style, which people do in a kind of survival, what we call survival snatch or squat snatch or dead snatch, it's basically a single inverted U. And basically as it's at the end of the swing, you're still applying a lot of force into the ground. And why you do that from a kettlebell sport perspective is you can kind of squat down and you can spare your grip. It's less efficient, but it's a bit easier on your grip squatting down. And I'm not saying hard style does a squat style, but if you watch kettlebell sport, again, coming back to that movement variability thing, in the last minute, some people need to do this, like myself, and some really elite people just plow through it with the same technique or just modify slightly. Your grip starts to go, and then you just adjust your lower body mechanics. So say if you're starting to, again, if you think grip peaks first, then it's lower body, and then what you do by when it's higher and just decelerating it down instead of going into that pendulum, you're trying to lower the force, or you're trying to decelerate it of a greater length. So hopefully that makes sense. And I saw that in some of the Australians when we did a 6-minute set, which broke my computer because I had 2 force plates getting 1,000 bits of information a second. So if you do 6 minutes of that, that's quite a lot. And then I had 8 infrared cameras at 250 hertz, or 250 bits of information a second. So basically I tried to put it into my computer and it blew up basically. It just didn't work. So there was a lot of data. This took me like a year to analyze that. I'm not a particularly good researcher though, but I'm quite interested in, I'm a coach firstly.
So the cameras map the trajectory, and then you said force plates. Did you have a plate beneath each foot?
Correct, yeah.
Okay.
So again, well, what's quite interesting in the classic snatch style or the modern snatch style is, or hard style is, classic snatch and modern snatch, or classic snatch and like a hard style, they typically will slightly use one leg more than the other, the leg that has the kettlebell on the same side, just because there's a bit more force going that way. But the modern style, you kind of use one leg than the other leg. And it's kind of like, if you ever see someone moving out to the side a bit more, the kettlebell kind of goes, instead of just going straight up and down, like from the side, it would look like a C. I should have made that distinct before when I was talking about a C, it's from the side. But front on, the classic sort of goes up and down, maybe slightly out to the side, so it's above the shoulder, excuse me. Whereas the modern will like typically go out a bit to the side. And that means you can kind of use one leg than the other leg. And there's successful lifters using both.
That's where you see the heel lift?
Yeah, that's it. So yeah, you're shifting weight from one side to the other, or you're trying to shift your weight. Again, if the kettlebell is going forward, typically you'll shift your weight against that to counterbalance it and try to be as efficient as possible. Yeah. So cool. You typically see like heel lifts and more exaggerated heel lifts when you're shifting your weight more.
Right on. Back to the force graph, the McDonald's sign peaks of force with the sport
Yeah.
snatch. Did you happen to notice if the force was greater on the backswing than on the forward swing?
I think you're testing my memory here, but I believe on the upwards phase it was slightly higher. I'll see if I can even bring it up now.
Yeah,
But
you can bring it up. We can do
I can share my
screen
screen,
share.
I guess. Just a sec. All right. So, share. So this is fixation. So this is where you're just basically standing. So then you can see we've sort of got this drop phase. So now I'm starting this squiggly line, this line coming up. That's me starting to apply a bit more force. And so typically here is kind of the end of the backswing. Is the lowest point as it's passing through your legs. And you can see you're applying a bit of horizontal force here to kind of move forward and counterbalance the kettlebell, because the kettlebell is moving up and down and also forward and backwards and side to side. So you've got this sort of counterbalancing here. And see this midpoint, this is like right at the end of the backswing. So this is really where you've got that pendulum, and that's where you've kind of relaxed. And again, with a hard style, typically, again, just generally speaking, in what they're typically after is that would be an inverted U, or if you do a squat snatch in kettlebell sport, that would be typically an inverted U. So if you look over here, so this is about 1,000 newtons, about 100 kilos, about 225 pounds, I think, as a 2.205, I think is a difference. So typically with newtons, you just divide it by gravity for kilos. I'm not sure what it is for pounds. So this is the same side leg, or the ipsilateral leg, and this is the contralateral or opposite side leg. So you can see that this person has a bit of a weight shift, and it's a slightly different thing. And you can see this horizontal force is up a fair bit there.
Same side leg as the hand holding the kettlebell? Okay.
Yep, so that's the ipsilateral side, or just the jargon for same side, and then contralateral is just jargon for opposite side. And yeah, so this is the vertical force, or the force you're applying up and down, and there's the horizontal or anterior, posterior, forward and back, and the left to right.
So is this graph the average of the data you collected?
That's a good question. No, so this is what we said was a typical snatch. So this is for the amateur, so the Australians using a 24. And this wasn't the average of those guys. This was what we sort of deemed to be the typical sort of one. So there's one with more exaggerated styles.
Okay.
Now, if I, okay, so this is probably my favorite graph, or table, I should say here. So this is the downwards phase. So this is fixation, or the overhead point, and you can see, so there's about 24 kilos or thereabouts being applied to the kettlebell. Again, if you divide it by 9.81, that's kilos. So they're all using 24 kilo kettlebell. So it's so this is the force across both legs, or essentially this was the weight of gravity plus the kettlebell. But then when we bring it down to the midpoint, you can see that obviously the kettlebell is moving faster, but weirdly, the force has gone down here. Hopefully this makes sense and you can follow it. So the force you're applying into the ground has gone down because the kettlebell is basically weightless.
Yeah.
And you can see here, the kettlebell starting to you're starting to apply more force because you're decelerating it, well, now you're starting to decelerate it, I should say, because that's picked up its maximum speed there, or velocity. And you can see the kettlebell force you're applying into the ground through the legs is going up, so you're moving away. And then again, maximum acceleration to the kettlebell. So this is here. So 814 newtons on average for 12 guys. On the way up, if you look down here, it was 885. So there's a bit more force on the way up. I guess that makes sense. And typically for a 20 kilo kettlebell, that'd be, what we sort of saw, and I did some testing of some heavier bells and some lighter ones, is typically is like 3.5 times gravity for the kettlebell when you're accelerating at its maximal point. So with the guys snatching 32s, we were up around, for some of them, around 1,000 newtons, or about 100 kilos, or 225 pounds of peak force. Again, if you kind of equate that. So when you think of it, why I think kettlebell sport's pretty cool is like some guys will do that for 200 or more reps. So you've done 200 reps of something that you have to apply, over 200 pounds of force to the kettlebell.
Wow.
So that's where you kind of can see that really, particularly when you're using 32s and stuff like that, it is like a sport of power endurance or strength endurance. And these guys are getting quite high oxygen consumption stuff as well throughout that.
Were you tracking oxygen consumption as well?
Oh, we weren't, but we did some testing stuff on the side, which we never published. But some of the guys were getting pretty high, relatively high oxygen consumption. So we had a guy getting over 5 liters. So like elite cyclists will probably be like 6.5. I'm not a cyclist, so don't hold me to that. So they're still getting quite high VO2 peaks. I should say the cyclists would typically be lighter, so their relative, when we convert it from liters to mils per kilo, would be much higher. But when you consider that these guys are also applying so much force into the ground, and then a lot of these guys can comfortably deadlift over 200 kilos and comfortably run a marathon, it's kind of, like, essence, it's kind of prepares you for a lot of things, kind of like what CrossFit tries to do. Except it does it in a different way. So you kind of specialize in a few lifts as opposed to a few lifts that transfer to other things, as opposed to doing a variety of different lifts. So the movement vocabulary would be different. But again, it really just depends on what you're interested in. And personally, for me, I quite like kettlebell sport because I got to, start another sport. Hadn't really competed in anything for a long time, and it's relatively easy on your body. So hopefully that all makes sense. I can go through this one on the upwards phase if you find that interesting, which is starting from the end of the backswing. But again, if you just, I should say this article is open access. So if you just look up Piaget and you just search for this one,
cool.
You should be able to download it, and you can check out all the graphs, or if someone wants to email me, I can shoot it through to them. Here's a nice picture of me doing the kettlebell snatch with the different
cool.
phases.
So you can point out where the maximal force is here, right?
Oh yeah, okay. Well, this makes a lot of sense. So yeah, so as the kettlebell is sort of passing through here, this is possibly where the kettlebell is a little bit further, would be where peak force is happening.
Mm-hmm.
On the way, when it just passes your knees here, would typically be, for most people, where you're applying the most force to the kettlebell. So here is kind of most force into the ground, here is most force into the kettlebell. And then as it's getting past parallel, it's kind of, you're guiding it up there. So you can see the kettlebell's out past my hand there, but then it's coming back onto my wrist. So that's what we refer to as a hand insertion phase. So if we come back over here, we've got fixation, then we've got this drop phase. Probably should have brought this out before, didn't I? I didn't think to do that.
Yeah, it works.
I've shift my weight into my heels, so I've counterbalanced against the kettlebell. So again, I'm moving with the kettlebell, trying to keep a relatively vertical torso as the kettlebell passes through my legs. But this is, again, possibly like around here, you've got peak deceleration force to the kettlebell, and then you're getting peak vertical force into the ground here. just as the kettlebell is passing through. And then we've got this backswing. This is, again, where you get this is where it's really low, like at the bottom of that W. So if I'm scrolling down here, so it's kind of like this point. So I'm trying to get that moment of relaxation where, again, with hardstyle, you'd probably compress more into your hip hinge, or I think they talk about an athletic swing now, athletic hinge or something like that. So is a little bit of a squat, a little bit more of a hip hinge, and just kind of compressing like a swing, loading up, and then powering it forward. So they don't have that lull. But in kettlebell sport, that's really what you're after, is those moments of rest. And there's practitioners that can do both. Like most people can snatch multiple different ways. It's just, they're just like, this is what I'm after. I'll just do it this way. And throughout the course of a 10-minute set, you might go to more of a squat or a survival style snatch. So then, we've got our forward swing and, back to fixation. Yeah. So.
What surprised you the most out of this data, if anything?
Well, what I was sort of after typically was trying to validate what's been said in courses and workshops. See if I can bring up something interesting. So I think what really surprised me the most is that people are individually different. I'll bring it back up if I need to. But yeah, there's quite a bit of individual differences, particularly in kettlebell sport, but there's still those kind of main principles that hold true. So the world champions all had different approaches, but they still had all those distinct phases. So I thought that was really interesting. And with the amateur Australian lifters, there was, for some people, like so we did a 6-minute set. Some people didn't have that much of a difference in their grip strength. So we measured grip strength pre and post. And other people, it was quite a big difference. And it probably just depends to some extent on their level. You would think if it's 6 minutes is a common training set for kettlebell sport, like 3 minutes each hand. Typically, you would just up your pace. Basically, if like say if you do 210 minutes, you do 24 in 6 minutes or something like that. So, but yeah, typically it was quite neat for some people, and then other people, they did change their style as the set went on. So some people could hold that consistent thing, and then other people kind of went to that more of a survival snatch. I think probably the thing that's most surprising is it took so long to analyze. Again, I'm trying to get my head around like different programming languages and stuff like that. And so it takes a long time when you're getting into research. There's all these different things you have to learn, like using infrared cameras or using R or Python. Different things like that actually take a long time. Once you get the hang of it.
Do you have a background in scientific research?
Yeah, so not hugely, just as part of my master's. So I have 2 master's degrees. I've got one in strength and conditioning, and we talk about the scientific method and a little bit about analyzing group stuff. So particularly for strength and conditioning, you might have group norms. So determining that and then looking at where your player is and Z scores and stuff like that. So if you have a running back and you want them to have, or what America does really well is like they're really good at testing, and they know, like with the combines, like this person, they've got a great 40 meter dash. I believe that's, and so they're potentially, that transfers well to them being a good X player. And so they're really good at teasing that stuff. And that's kind of like their norm. So that they know that if they can, I'm not sure if bench press is the best measure, but if they've got whatever vertical, they're probably pretty good at changing directions and things like that. So you can kind of take or do what we call like a strength diagnosis. So if someone has good counter movement jump, or, you might drill into that a bit more, like take off momentum or take off velocity, maybe for a rugby player, or whatever position, lineman or something, means that they can generate a lot more momentum. So if momentum, velocity, and weight, and mass, I should say, sorry. So you can smash into people better. So like, I guess you can kind of look into things like that. So in terms of scientific background, we did that stuff sort of in strength and conditioning. And then when I did my research masters, which is what we're looking at that for kettlebell snatch, of course, we have like research subjects, but I haven't, a lot of like the other stuff is just informal, like, or just, you know, hey mate who uses this equipment, can you do me a favor and show me how to do it? And sometimes the guys from, say, Vicon will come in and they'll teach people and stuff like that. But if you can't make that, then you're sort of trying to find out what's happening, and your supervisors, some of them will help you with different things, and others you just sort of got to work it out yourself. So it's just kind of self-guided learning for a lot of stuff. And
Very cool.
sometimes it can take it can take quite a long time for certain things.
Yeah.
I know a lot more people now with sports science are just doing data analytics. It's like, it's becoming more like that. There's so much data. Some of the sports teams now just, some of my friends just do data analytics for Australian rules football, things like that. There's so much information now with GPS and all that stuff, and also big data. Some, you know, people talk about if someone's playing well, maybe they have better sales of X, Y, and Z, things like that.
Cool.
Yeah.
And your research with the kettlebell swing, will you be basically doing the same thing, or is there a different thing you're after in that research?
Yeah, so I guess I really like the kettlebell snatch, and I think it's a fantastic movement. It is pretty complicated, and for a lot of probably your listeners, it's not a problem to do, but for general application, for some people, it's probably a bit tricky, but also for strength and conditioning, I think the kettlebell snatch has some application, but I think the swing probably has more application for pure strength and conditioning. I should say there isn't really like, it's pretty hard to get like grants and stuff like that to do research into an obscure Russian sport. You know, there's, you know, people probably aren't like willing to be like, you're going to, you know, cure diabetes by teaching people to snatch a little bit better.
Well, if you're watching this interview, James is going to give you a bank account. You just wire your money to support this research.
I should say some people have helped me out with some of the stuff I've been trying to do on the side. What I was planning to do last year was, so I've got my own portable force plates. I was planning to try and go around to all the comps in Australia, and typically the last few years I've been going overseas as well. I'm not sure if I'd want to bring my force plates overseas, but I'm thinking about it, but they might think it's a bomb. I don't know, just like a black box with wires coming out. I have heard some funny stories, but yeah, so the swing has a lot more application probably for strength and conditioning, because, you know, if you want to do a maximum power exercise, you might be better off doing a barbell snatch, because you can hold it with two hands, or a power snatch, or a clean pull, or anything like that. But a swing, you can actually lift really heavy swings, and if you struggle, say, with the power clean, maybe a swing's a good option. Also, the swing has that sort of eccentric, or it reloads you, so it has a slightly different application. When the swing's coming back down, what the swing does, and this is something Brett Contreras has really popularized, is you have potentially a vector specificity. So the theory is if you do more horizontal things, they transfer to more horizontal stuff, or more vertical stuff transfers to more vertical stuff. And the kettlebell has a combination of both. I think they haven't, especially with respect to kettlebell, we're not 100% sure. So what I probably look at is some kettlebell stuff, and then looking at how it transfers to running. And there's a couple of studies that have looked at it, and some have found that it did improve running, and others have found it didn't, or sprinting and running time trials, stuff like that.
Yeah.
But I think when you look at the nitty gritty, the context is really important. If you take a sprinter, so I think there was a study that looked at doing Tabata swings for sprinters, for female sprinters with like an 8 kilo, I think it was just too light and just not enough volume. And if they're doing deadlifts and power cleans, if you take that away and then you replace it with swings and stuff like that, it, you know, there might not be enough to even maintain that quality, that strength and power. So you potentially could detrain doing that. So I think getting the dosage of kettlebell training right, and I think also it's relatively easier to implement than say the kettlebell snatch. Again, I think that's a fantastic exercise, and there was a nice study for strength and conditioning that looked at Division 1 or Division 2 athletes doing more of a hard style, like a Kenneth J Viking Warrior protocol. I think he's like, so they did their incremental test, so like 5 minutes building up the pace, and what they got from there, then they did some kettlebell snatch intervals compared to circuit training, and they found that the kettlebell training improved their VO2. So I think this again was soccer players, again off the top of my head. So that's like paints a nice picture, and I think that's where kettlebell snatch particularly is quite useful, is you can vary your pace. When it comes to like raw strength and power, the swing is going to be your best bet, because you can swing really heavy loads. I think Kettlebell Kings or Rogue, they have like up to a 92 kilo kettlebell, but there's some places that have 100 kilo kettlebells. Or you see people with these plate loaded kettlebells that are crazy and swinging like 200 kilos or sorry, I'm not using pounds, but hopefully people can work it out.
Kettlebell people know what kilos are.
Yeah, so I think the swing has a lot of application. Again, if I speak to my friend in Queensland, Neil, the kettlebell physio, he's looking at, kettlebells have been shown to be good for balance and counter movement jump, or like jumping and power and stuff like that, with a relatively low dosage in untrained people. Or so he's looking at bone mineral density, I believe, and muscle mass. So if you can give old people a kettlebell swing or some kettlebell movements, and then they don't fall and they have better balance and better quality of life, that's a really important thing. So that's where I think, if you can't run, kettlebell swing is great. Or if you're a runner but you want some off legs or off your Achilles, like lots of runners, particularly trail runners, or particularly any runner often can get Achilles problems. So maybe switching in some kettlebell swings, maybe, it'd be a good study, I think, may improve your running performance, or maybe maintain it, or it allows you to improve your higher speed running, or maybe at least maintain it, help your running economy, maybe, without loading up your legs too much. Or someone with diabetes or who's obese, doing a kettlebell swing is definitely going to be a lot easier than going for a run. For sure. Maybe they also feel better about it because they get stronger and more powerful. Again, I'm not saying kettlebell swing is better than squatting or deadlifting for getting strong, but for a lot of people, kettlebell swings are, if they don't do a whole lot of stuff, are a really great jack of all trades. And I think that's where a lot of people like them, is you can get quite strong and you can improve your ability to jump, but you can also improve your fitness. If you think about a video game, I kind of think if you've got like a bar, kettlebells are like maybe 80% of everything, whereas maybe a barbell is like 100% of strength, but not so much endurance. And like running's kind of like 100% endurance, but not so much strength and things like that. And that's where I think kettlebells train so many qualities for a lot of people who don't have 5-6 hours to spend in the gym a week just training kettlebells regularly 3 times a week, 2 times a week. They can get so many fitness qualities out of it that they get a lot of bang for their buck, I guess you could say.
Yeah, especially now if you don't have access to a gym at all.
Yeah, absolutely. Like just getting good at swings, and maybe you do some presses and rows, or some different things like that, different types of swings, or you can go down the kettlebell sport or more of a hard style kind of programs, doing different ladders or time sets. You can get so many things out of it, and there's different ways to look at it. Even with quite a minimal exercise selection approach, there's so much nuance and variability that you can apply. There's a lot of stuff to do.
Very cool. Very cool. So you have your gym. What's the name of your gym?
The Richmond Gym.
The Richmond Gym.
That's it. So I believe there's a Richmond in America, because I think someone
there
has
is.
a similar
Virginia.
Gym. Right. So we're not really competing with them, but the Richmond Gym, we're sort of, I think we just decided on it one day. It's kind of straightforward. It is what it is. It's actually quite good for search engine optimization. The problem is we get so many like phone calls and emails from people from just another gym in Richmond. So Richmond's quite a big suburb. So people just search the Richmond Gym and then just, hey guys, I can't make it in today, but like different stuff like that. And it's constantly my business partner Ash is like on the phone and he's like, oh, sorry mate, this is a wrong gym, but if you want to come down, you're welcome to.
Work to your benefit in some cases. Yeah.
Sometimes, but it's often like with like people canceling other gyms or like they're moving away or there's different things like that. So it's pretty, you'd have to be pretty skillful at sales to change it around to why don't you come in and do some training with us? But typically at our gym, we do a bit of everything. We've got strength classes. We've got a functional fitness, which is kind of like circuit training. And then we've got conditioning classes, which is sort of more interval and circuit-based training, kind of mixed implements sometimes, or a bit more focused on sleds or rollers or something like that. And then we have some skills classes, like depending on, so there are 3 main classes, but depending on the time, we typically always have kettlebell skills class or a kettlebell sport class. But again, we just teach whatever, try and make it appropriate for the person. And we usually say with the kettlebell skills, again, kettlebell swing is quite an easier one to get up. Well, it's not easy, but you can get up to speed relatively quickly to a snatch. And sometimes people have to work on a lot of things before they can snatch. But we do try to work on more complicated exercises. So when we put this sort of skill banner on it, it's like for some people, it's going to be a really hard workout because they've got the underlying skill. But otherwise, if you don't have the underlying skill, you're just going to be working on your limiting factor before you can complete the exercise. And we also have like a barbell skills or a body weight skills. Okay. Some flexibility stuff, and it depends on the coaches and stuff like that. So cool. That's kind of how we sort of work out our gym and try to, I guess we're different to a CrossFit in that we use we repeat the same workout. What I was going to say was we use a sequence periodized program, which I know some CrossFit places do, but we would say repeat the same workout 3 or 4 times. And then we might do a block of 4 weeks and then, or a block of 8 weeks, and then we move on to the next thing. So we typically try to sequence our training in more of a strength endurance or hypertrophy kind of block, I guess you'd say. I'd probably say strength endurance because you can get hypertrophy from a range of different rep ranges, and then like more of a strength block, and then maybe more a power, and then we bring it back around. And we sometimes just have to try to have fun little comps, like we'll have more powerlifting orientated competitions throughout the year, or more kettlebell sport, or a bit of both, or more body weight stuff, just so we can use that as a fun thing for the community, but also as a way to test and monitor how people are adapting to the performance. So if we do something every 12 weeks, or we do the same thing every 12 weeks, then we can see how that block is changing. And you can sort of everyone can be their own personal experiment, I guess you'd say. So we talk a lot about process-orientated goals. So for us, it's really about turning up and trying to follow your plan. And if you follow your plan pretty closely, then you can assess if it works or if it didn't work. And if it didn't work, or if it didn't work quite as well, what do we need to change? If it worked, maybe we can refine a couple of things and then just move on from there. And that's kind of how we try to do things.
So are you giving each member their own plan or helping them create their own plan?
Yeah. So typically, well, for personal training clients, we do that. But if you're coming to the group classes, it's basically a template. So if we're doing squats, we might have someone doing a goblet squat. We might have someone doing a barbell front squat, or someone might do a low bar squat, depending on if they're more interested in powerlifting, or if they've got some restriction issues, or if they like Olympic lifting more, maybe they do more front squats or high bar squats, things like that. And just try to work with people's bodies, and basically, again, just try to get them in consistently and make it work for them, I guess, essentially, because sometimes, or like currently, one of our programs, we've sort of got a front squat and a kettlebell swing and an ankle mobilization, and we're just sort of trying to get about 5 sets of 5 with those sort of things. And that's one program. Then we've got some upper body stuff. So things are a little different at the moment because we trying not to share equipment. So, and we're trying to spread people throughout the gym. So we have changed how we do things a little bit for social distancing. So you kind of have your own little area in the gym and you don't cross over people. And that's where we just tell people if you're just popping on your mask and going from there. Mask wearing in Australia isn't really a political thing, but I believe it is a bit in the US. Again, because it's really like at the moment, Victoria and parts of New South Wales are wearing masks when they're inside. And the rest of Australia is just kind of doing what they want. I think Queensland, they just recently had like an outbreak's like 3 people or 1 person or something.
Oh, wow.
So I think they had 1 person with the UK strain and they locked down the city for 3 days for the contact tracing because they had about a week just going around with it. So
Wow.
obviously don't want that to be a super spreader event. Again,
Yeah.
having the numbers low, it allows you to do this sort of stuff.
Wow.
But I hope they get that under control because it's kind of just in your head, I guess, the whole time, all
Sure.
that sort of stuff. But I think, again, I think it just also depends on what your views are and things like that. But again, for me personally, with some family members that probably wouldn't do too well if they got it, I'm happy to do that. It is a hassle for our business, having to close, but at the end of the day, health is the main priority for me, and I think for a lot of people.
Absolutely.
But
Are you offering online classes right now or any online workshops?
yeah. So I do online coaching for kettlebell sport and just for some kind of like what I mentioned before. We've got a few guys that just time poor and or just have some kettlebells at home, and I think they really work well for like that low dosage interval training or just different circuits and things like that. So me personally, GS Science, we do that sort of stuff. For the gym, we've just transitioned to just doing all in the gym, but we were doing a hybrid, some classes online, some classes in person because again, it changes regularly. So we were at one stage only allowed 10 people in the gym or 10 people per room. And then it moved to 20 people. And we typically don't go over 20 people. And we don't, for our classes in the past, we'd cap it at 15, but to make people feel more comfortable, we just really keep it at 12. But we've got most of our local members in the gym, but I also do teach online stuff. And during the lockdown, we did everything online, which is pretty crazy. Like I mentioned, during the stricter portion of the lockdown, I did it all from home. Previously, I was allowed to go into the gym to do it. But with a baby at home, like sometimes there'd be a baby crying or just crazy stuff was happening. But I think people appreciate it. And it worked out quite well. And we have quite a big video library. So we would typically provide people with a program and a video library, and then we'd do the online support and the real-time feedback. But of course, in person is much better. But again, for some of my GS guys, we try to do some stuff online, but typically I'd give you a program with sort of video instructions typically and just feedback, whether that's real time or just like weekly or fortnightly or 14-day sort of correspondence.
Cool. And how, if someone was interested in working with you or taking into those programs, what's the best way to get in touch with you?
Yeah, so you can just follow my social media and just direct message me and I should be able to get back to you. So just GS Science on Instagram or GS Science on Facebook. And I also have a website, GS Science, and that's my blog, or it might be GS Science or gsscience.com.au. I really should know that. No, it's just gsscience.com.
We'll link it. We'll put the link in.
Yeah, and that's got some of my blogs where I just sort of write some random stuff about applying sports science to kettlebell sport. And again, that's part of my motivation for particularly my master's, is trying to look at applying some sort of sports science or documenting what these elite guys were doing and seeing if that trickles down to people who are just doing day-to-day stuff. And then my PhD is sort of more just on kettlebell swing. It's pretty much on hold all of last year. Just we're not allowed to collect data during a pandemic. I guess that makes sense.
Yeah.
But the risk of me getting it or other people getting it was too high. So the university, with the ethics, didn't want to take that risk with the insurance. So basically, I'm hoping to get really stuck into it this year, but we'll have to see how the vaccines and stuff go. I think it should be okay. Fortunately, our numbers are relatively low, but again, we're probably a bit more cautious.
Yeah.
So we'll see what happens. Yeah.
Very cool. We'll definitely keep following, and I look forward to hearing about the PhD in the kettlebell swing science.
Yeah, thanks so much. Really appreciate your time, and I hope all's well over there, and hopefully the world can get back on its feet this year.
Yeah.
And get back to relatively normal status.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, James.
No worries. Thanks, mate. Appreciate your time.
Yeah. Thank you.
Cheers.